The Sound of Money with Santosh Sirur.
Hello and welcome to a super special episode of The Sound of Money. And of course, this is season 2 of The Sound of Money. On this super special episode, we have amazing guests joining in from Boston. On this episode, I have Dr. Desh Deshpande and his wife, Mrs. Jaishree Deshpande, joining me from Boston. Dr. Desh Deshpande is a life member MIT. He's also the chairman of Sparta Group. He's also a trustee on the Deshpande Foundation. On my podcast, Dr. Deshpande is also later joined by his wife, Jaishree Deshpande, who have been living in Boston for the last 40 years. They set up the Deshpande Foundation in India about 30 years ago. Dr. Deshpande firmly believes that the next generation of successful companies will be built not only on mastering technology, but developing products to solve the problems of India. Here's an exclusive on The Sound of Money with Dr. Desh Deshpande, who will later be joined by his wife, Mrs. Jaishree Deshpande, on this podcast. So, Dr. Deshpande, warm welcome to this show, my podcast, The Sound of Money. When you look back at your own career, and nowadays, India, startup culture is so much talked about, and it's a buzzword kind of thing. You have seen that years back. I'm sure the struggles are maybe of a different kind, but the challenges are more or less similar. What are the kind of struggles and challenges you came across, and what were your key learnings, Dr. Deshpande?
Yeah. No. Thank you, Santosh. It was a different world at that time, but it doesn't matter when you start that journey. Entrepreneurial journey is always a unique journey, a lonely journey, very specific to every individual. Sometimes when that game is hard to fight, the good thing is there's not a lot of competition. When things get easy, there is so much competition, like right now. It's pretty intense. So your ideas have to be pretty profound. You have to stand out. And so when I left India 50 years ago, 1973, India did not have much confidence. There wasn't much of an economy. We had just gotten to freedom and so on. And then even in United States, when I started the companies in the 80s, there wasn't much of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. In fact, all of Boston, Massachusetts had maybe 5 or 6 entrepreneurs. And so it was a very different world. But come 50 years later, it's amazing how the entrepreneurial activity has really picked up big time in India. And of course, it's been around in US now for about 20 years or so. And it's essentially the entrepreneurship that's driving the economy. The world is changing. And when the world changes, each one of us have only 2 options. Either we grudgingly accept the change or we willingly lead the change. And most of the careers these days are built by either founders who lead that change and start the change, and the people who join them. So these days, if you want to have a fulfilling career, an exciting career, either you become an entrepreneur or you become entrepreneurial. And so entrepreneurship has become the mainstay of the economy and even in the social sector these days.
Indeed. So, you would have experienced that. Essentially, when somebody said, I want to start business, the head of the family, the parents especially, would like, are you sure? Because the mindset then was just get a safe job and just carry on with your life. In a way, it was like a stigma, especially when it failed. The society will look, what will they say? I'm sure those kind of challenges did come to you, and your loved ones did say somewhere at some point in time. But today, it's not that as much a stigma. In fact, if you say you're an entrepreneur, it's encouraged, motivated, and one proudly says, my son or my daughter is having his or her own business. So, what are those key qualities, sir, that one needs to have or possess in terms of an entrepreneur? What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's to be an entrepreneur, it doesn't matter when you become an entrepreneur, it's always a risky journey. So the people who love you most are the ones who will object to it the most. because they don't want to see you go through all those hassles. And so even now, when somebody says, "Hey, I'll give up my job and I'll become an entrepreneur," people do get a little concerned about it. But it was even more those days, because these days, if you fail, you get another opportunity. But those days, when you fail, the hit was a lot harder. And so the entrepreneur, I find that usually the entrepreneurs get started when they have a very deep conviction about something they want to do. Doesn't mean it's the right idea, the right conviction, because a lot of startups get started and don't make it. But conviction is an essential quality, essential ingredient for anybody to get started. In fact, whenever people come to me and say, "Hey, I have a fantastic idea. Should I start a company?" My answer always is no, don't. Because if you aren't there, you're not going to get it started. And also, whenever people start companies or any entrepreneurial activity, there's only three surprises. It's going to be harder than you thought, it's going to take longer than you thought, and it's going to take more money than you thought. So unfortunately, there's only bad news. And if you don't have that strong conviction, and if you're not doing it because that's what you want to do, it will be very difficult for you to persevere through those hurdles. So the first time you hit a roadblock, number one, all your well-wishers will come back and say, "I told you so, I told you not to do this," right? And so if you don't have that inner conviction and determination, you're going to give up. It's not going to go anywhere. And so I think conviction is very important to get started. But then as you go along, I find that there are two characteristics of an entrepreneur who survive and make it happen. One is you have to be somewhat naive. And the other one is you have to be very optimistic. You have to be naive in the sense, when you start an entrepreneurial career, you don't really know how you're going to get there. You know that you want to get there, and you're convinced that it's worth getting there. But unlike an MBA or a good manager who puts together a strategic plan, gets all the resources done, puts all the contingency plans, in those exercises, you prepare 100% and then you start the journey. In the entrepreneurial journey, you're just getting started. You don't even know how to get there, but you know where you want to get to. And so there's a new problem every day. And those problems will get solved if people are optimistic. So, in some ways, that's the biggest blessing that entrepreneurs have. They're so optimistic that they're irrationally optimistic. So, whether it's true or not, they believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And in some ways, it's not a bad way to live your life, because you're always full of hope. And so being naive and being optimistic are the two characteristics, I think, which get an entrepreneur through life.
Amazing words there, Dr. Deshpande. Another important area, I think, for a new startup, and more so when somebody comes up as a founder and also has a co-founder, then the question comes is what it takes to be, to be a co-founder. What are those essential key qualities, the skill sets, or whatever features that one should look in for? Because many a time co-founders, they may be the best of friends, they may be best of colleagues in offices, but it's only when you start working with them, you realize, oh, I wish, he or she had this skill set, or that expectations start to build up. I'm sure you have had such experiences in your career when you started, working with others. And again, more so important when you have co-founders of different nationalities, their cultures, their mindsets, their skill sets matter. So any advice on or suggestions in this space on co-founders?
Well, I think it's good if you have complementary skills, so that you can look at different issues from different perspectives. But more than anything else is the honest communication and link between the two people that make the teams work. But it's very hard. It's very hard to know upfront whether it's going to work or not. So, and that's true with any decisions you make in life. Whenever you make a decision, and if you have to make a decision at that particular point, nobody makes a mistake. They make the decision based on the information that you have. What becomes obvious over a course of a week, a month, a year, 2 years, is whether that particular decision that you made is right or wrong. So the biggest lesson in life, I think, is not so much trying to get every decision right, every co-founder right, but to do the remedial thing, that whatever it is that you need to do, when you realize that it was a wrong mistake, it was a mistake, right? So, for example, the first company when I was starting in the 80s, my co-founder, Frank Bruns, I was those days, Indian immigrants were not known for entrepreneurial activities. And so Frank Bruns and I teamed up, and we worked together for a whole year without salary. So it was a very close relationship. And dream come true, a year later, we actually got funded by good people, Seven Rosen, T Associates, and so on. So we thought we had it all made, but within 3-4 months, we ran into a difference of opinion. And obviously, he was a more senior person, and I didn't think it was the right way to approach the product. We were trying to do something that's 10 times better than what the competition had. But it turned out that 10 times was very hard, 8 times was doable, 5 times was a piece of cake. So my approach was, hey, Frank, let's do 5 times better, and that's good enough. But he was more of a technical macho. He said, no, give me 2 more weeks, we can get it done. And 2 weeks went by, 4 weeks went by, 6 weeks went by. And then at that point, I knew that that's a mistake, that particular approach, from my perspective. And, all these things, you never know whether it's the right decision or wrong decision. But what I didn't want to do was to hang around and be there and say, hey, Frank, I told you so, which would be a negative force. So even if he was going to be successful, he will not be successful if I'm not. And so I think for entrepreneurs or anybody to be able to clearly distinguish things that they control from things that they don't control, and not worry too much about things that are not under your control. You just have to sort of, at that point, I was a junior guy, and the board had probably would not have went my way. And so one day when I was driving to office, I called up my wife Jaishree and said, hey, I'm going to quit today. And she said, okay, if that's what you want to do. So I went to the office and told Frank that, hey, Frank, this is not going to work. Why don't you do this and I'll do something else? And of course, he was very happy. and so I think so. It's very hard, in spite of working with him for a whole year. If you had said, is he a right co-founder? I would have said, yes, absolutely. And so I think of course, you can do some due diligence, make sure that you get along and you make the right decisions and so on. But the co-founder may or may not be the right person based on the situations, the kind of decisions that you make. And people change also, situations change. But if the 2 co-founders are not on the same page, one of them should quit.
Okay, good point. Dr. Deshpande, Tejas Networks, share with us some of your I would say the high points and probably the learnings probably from Tejas Networks. And today what we see Tejas Networks really spearheading into the space of technology, right? But you were there right from literally day one. Maybe if you could share some of those moments there.
Yeah. So, I left India in 1973 and I got married in 1980. And as you may know, my wife Jaishree and Narayan Murthy's wife Sudha, sisters. And so he started his company in 1980. So our career tracks have been somewhat parallel. And so I've seen him sort of do the company in India, which is an amazing story, Infosys. And so similarly, TCS and Wipro and a whole bunch of other service companies got going. And it's a nice model because it's a dollar revenue and a rupee expense at that time. Most of my companies were not service companies, they were all product companies. And so by year 2000, I had a bunch of product companies that were successful, went public and so on. I'd never done anything in India, any business in India. But somehow I always felt that maybe India is ready for some product companies because India, in spite of doing all that software and everything else for other countries, it did not have a culture of developing products for their own good. And India is still in imports about $400 billion worth of electronic goods. And so I felt that the time has come when India needs to jump into the product business. And then, after Sycamore, I happened to meet one of the co-founders of Tejas, Kumar Sivarajan. He was a gold medalist from IIT Madras, Caltech PhD, worked at IBM, and then he was a professor at ISC. So he met me at one of the conferences and said, hey, you were a professor, you're an entrepreneur, I'm a professor, I want to be an entrepreneur. And it just so happened that every engineer in Sycamore used to use the most authoritative book on optical networking written by Kumar Sivarajan.
Wow.
So I said, hey, if you have this kind of talent, it's a great starting point. And then the two other co-founders joined the group and we got started in year 2000.
Okay.
And the idea was to develop products. And so we had about, 200-300 very good engineers. Most of them got relocated from Bell Labs and US and so on. And we actually got the product developed. But India did not have a culture of developing products. So Indians would not accept the product in India. So actually Reliance, Bharti, a lot of these networks got built with Tejas products, but we had to OEM it to Northern Telecom, and Northern Telecom would get the contract from these people to build the product and to build the network.
Circular.
And so we went through that for about 10 years or so, and we did okay. And then we went through the second phase where India would say, okay, now I accept because you have more than 200,000 products in the network and network works and everything else. So I believe that you guys can do the product, but I don't want to give you the same price because you're an Indian product.
Not fair.
So there was a margin issue, right?
True.
And it's only recently that, with all the Atmanirbhar and everything else, and also there is a lot of other products coming into play. The manufacturing is getting picked up in India. And so I'm very pleased that the right time has come for India, where people can do product companies. Even now, there's a lot of software product companies, not too many hardware product companies, but I'm sure over the next decade, there'll be plenty of opportunities to do hardware for telecom and medical devices and a whole bunch of things. And so I think it's an exciting time in India. I think China went through that. China did not go through the service sector. They were directly into manufacturing first and then product development.
Yeah.
And India is now just picking up steam on that.
Brilliant. Dr. Deshpande, whilst India is working hard, Indians are working hard, there's always that work-life balance, which is quite talked about. And also the other issue is about going beyond one's comfort zone and trying out something new, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs. What are your views? And maybe you too have had such experiences.
Yeah, I think working hard on these things, it just comes naturally. I think in the sense, when you fall in love with something, you want to do that. And so my approach has always been simplify your life to the point where you don't have too many things to do, right? So you can still care for your family, you can still be there for your children and everything else, but the only other thing you do is build companies, right? If you're building a company, if you're going through that stage.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to sort of then feel like, hey, I need to golf, I need to see movies, I need to do this, I need to do that, and everything else. But it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. that's what you want to do. I mean, you'd rather be working at the company and experience that exciting progress that you're making than anything else. So I think in some ways, it has to come naturally. If you force it, it's not going to help. If you just sit in the office for a long period of time, just because you want to be there, that's useless. I mean, that there's no productivity there.
Both you and Mrs. Deshpande have done immense contribution for social development in India. Talk to us, and maybe you could talk more about the Deshpande Foundation. What kind of work has been done by this foundation in India? And especially, it's very important, whilst India is aggressively growing economically, the socio-economic space is equally important. And you both have been spearheading this from quite some time, right? And I'm sure you've seen quite an action on the ground. Maybe our listeners would like to know, what kind of challenges have you seen in India and development that you see in coming years?
Yeah, let me tell you how we got here. Number one, our first company went public in 1994. So 95 is when we set up the foundation. And 2000 is when we started spending more time on the foundation. And the experience that we went through being an entrepreneur, it was not planned, but it was an amazing experience. It is an amazing experience because every year you look back and you say, I didn't know I could do that. And that's an amazing feeling, not only for yourself, but everybody else that works for you.
Yeah.
It gives an opportunity for tremendous growth. So in year 2000, when we started thinking about it, first we said, well, can we create more opportunities for people like ourselves, mostly in US? And by that time, a lot of the ideas that came out for the companies that we started in the 80s and 90s were from Bell Labs. And Bell Labs was gone. And so the US taxpayers were spending about $50 billion a year in funding university research. So I joined the board of MIT in 2000. And then our first big initiative was to set up the Deshpande Centre for Technological Innovation at MIT.
Yeah.
Which essentially was to connect innovators to the marketplace so that they come up with some good ideas. And those ideas will lead to entrepreneurial activity. Fortunately, that became very successful. And that led to, and then I introduced a program called iCore in NSF. We funded it. And that's become a nationwide program. And amazingly, last year alone, 2,500 companies came out of it. And now India is actually spending a lot of money on R&D, about 100,000 crores.
Wow.
So to replicate iCore in India, we started a program called Incubate in IIT Madras. And that's gaining a lot of traction. And we probably have to do it for several more years before the government takes it over, like in the US.
Yeah.
But for all of this, but then we sort of felt like, hey, we're just helping people who are doing well. How about those who are being left behind with all this technology and everything else? So the model that slowly got developed was that out of the 8 billion people, 3 billion people have disposable income and 5 billion people don't have disposable income, and they both have problems. And solving their problems is what everything is about.
Yeah.
When you solve the problems of the people who have disposable income, you have to compete for the opportunity. And so the formula there is relevance, innovation plus relevance is equal to impact, meaning you have to lead with innovation. You have to bring something new to the game. Otherwise, you won't get an opportunity to make a difference in their lives. Whereas when you go to the other 5 billion people, particularly if you go to the bottom, they're just struggling to get through life. And therefore, innovation doesn't mean anything for them. So what becomes more important is relevance. So it's relevance plus innovation is equal to impact. So you have to co-create the solution with them. And then you have to build capacity within those communities. And if you're lucky enough to find good interventions and you start scaling them, then you get opportunities to inject a lot of technology, strategic planning, financial engineering, all the good things that you do in the 3 billion people economy. And so this program, we started about 15, 16 years ago in India. Initially, we thought we were going to fund other organizations and nurture them and have them do the impact. We funded about 183 of them, out of which Akshay Patra is the one that scaled quite a bit, and so we continue to work with that one. But the other nonprofits, they're pretty suboptimal. They did not have the management, no balance sheet, no strategic planning.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that misses there is the feedback from the customers, because the people that you help are not necessarily people who pay for it.
Yeah.
And therefore, you don't have that natural feedback from the
inclination
customers.
to share feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, so we have 3 million NGOs in the US, 3 million NGOs in India, and most of them are useless.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a land of the living dead in some ways, because there's no mergers, acquisitions, there's no bankruptcy. So they just survive. And so we said, well, is there a way we can bring a different approach to this whole nonprofit sector? And so about 7, 8 years ago, we shifted over to being just implementers, both in US and India. And so we have a large operation in India. It's based in Hubli in Karnataka, halfway between Bangalore and Mumbai. And we have 1,200 people on the payroll. We have several large campuses. And we work in agriculture, startup, micro-entrepreneurship, and skilling. So I can give you an example of a program that I'm talking about where you develop interventions just like you develop a product.
Okay.
For example, farmers in India, the biggest multiplier of income for them is water.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of water in India, unlike Israel and so on. They get 60 to 80 centimeters of rain every year, but they don't have the water when they need it. So we dig a hole that's 100 feet by 100 feet by 12 feet, which is a farm pond. And it's a pond that's owned by individual farmers.
Okay.
So it collects rainwater, and then it irrigates about 5 acres of land and doubles and triples the income right away. So we started this program about 10 years ago. So we've now done about 10,000 of them, and gotten to the point where every farm pond costs about 1 lakh. And the farmer pays for the whole thing now. He pays 20% upfront, and he gets another 80% through loan. And we probably put another 10% on top of that to manage the whole process and construct it and so on. But now that we have done 10,000, we are on target to do 100,000 of them. And probably we need more. Because it's probably one of the best climate mitigation programs.
Mm-hmm.
The groundwater level goes up, the greenery improves, and as well as improve the income of the people that we're trying to help. But now that we have scale, it also gives us an opportunity to introduce sophisticated approaches. So we have a rural transformation technology center that tracks about 30 satellites every month. And we get about a petabyte of data every month. And given any piece of land in India, we can recreate the history of water for the last 12 years.
Wow, awesome.
Which helps us locate the farm pond ideally. And it's a fantastic logistics center too, because you have to construct thousands of these, right?
Yeah.
So you need to manage the construction. And then once it's constructed, we can also monitor every farm to make sure that they're actually making good use of it, and that their income is going up, and that they can pay back the loan and build their credit history.
Oh, that's good.
So we're trying to bring some new approaches to the social sector, where the intervention goes through improvement every year. You go from version 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, which is sort of a lesson you learn from for competition business, because if you don't do that, you die.
Yeah.
Whereas in nonprofit, you could do the same thing for 50 years and you can still say, hey, it's a good intervention, right? So, and so I think combining talent and that connectedness and relevance and staying close to the customers that you're trying to help, and also getting them to participate in paying for it, which really brings the dignity and a a very strong feedback. So you can't get away by doing a shoddy job because they would not accept it. So it's been a very fulfilling journey. We also have a skilling program where we bridge young men and women from villages, graduates, to jobs. We've done 14,000 of them, and we're on way to do 100,000 of them.
Oh, fantastic.
And we do something similar in US as well.
Oh, brilliant. Very brilliant. Dr. Deshpande, you have spent, I'm sure, a lot of your time mentoring new startups, new entrepreneurs, both probably in India and as well as the United States. What are the key, sharings that you probably have, spoken to them, and what are the challenges they come across? I'm sure that kind of, sharing for our audiences who are probably the prospects here would like to understand more from you and your experience.
Yeah. So the entrepreneurs, I think they. So I think it's a question of they coming up with ideas, answering some basic questions of who cares,
Yeah.
why would anybody care if you did that, staying close to the customers, being faster to the market so that you can get the feedback as opposed to trying to think through the whole thing and take a lot of time to develop the products. And the other thing is a lot of the entrepreneurs, some of them are very technical. And so they think that their job is to develop the product and at some point hire sales and marketing to sell the product. Usually that never works because entrepreneur is the one who's got the biggest conviction of why anybody should use that. And so I think the entrepreneurs need to get over that hurdle and say, I need to sell. You don't need the best language, the best sales skills and everything else, but your product has to be good enough that you can actually convince people that they should participate in that venture. And if the entrepreneur cannot sell the first customer, second, third, fourth, then it's very unlikely that the company will actually happen. But once you get the traction, then of course you build a whole sales force, which is like a manufacturing, because if you have to get hundreds of them, then you do need very methodical sales process. But shying away from sales is probably the biggest problem that I see with entrepreneurs, particularly in India. Because they don't want to make cold calls. It's hard. If you're an engineer, you're used to working on environments where you control everything and you work hard.
Yeah.
And you solve the problem. But when you start selling, you get thrown out of the office. Nobody wants to talk to you. That rejection is hard to accept.
That's the reality check, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so what happens is, you have to get used to it, because first time somebody says, no, it's no good, get lost, it'll take about 3 weeks to recover, right? And so, but you get used to it and you learn how to do it. And so that's probably, getting out there and selling, but also learning how to make cold calls, because a lot of times people feel that if you just go to people, a lot of people come to me mostly because they want some money or they want me to buy their product or something. It doesn't happen that way. You'll neither get the money nor will you get the purchase order. And because you want to sell the product to people who really need it, not just people who buy out of pity or sympathy, because that just postpones the downfall of the company.
Completely.
And also, so I think being bold enough to make those cold calls for customers for money and so on, and being able to take no for an answer is probably a biggest thing that the entrepreneurs have to learn.
Okay, indeed. Very, very good suggestions and advice there. Dr. Deshpande, I'm sure you now have been interacting with a lot of stakeholders here in India. And you personally have been witnessing India's growth story, right? It's really on probably, as they say, the Amritkal for India. What's been the kind of the opinions or the views that have been expressed by the international community that you have interacted with on India? Because you would have seen an India of the 80s or the 70s rather when you moved to United States. and now? What are the huge key differences, and are they positive?
Yeah. No. I think it's gone through a very big change. 70s when we came here, we were considered okay and good graduate students, but nobody could be a professor or a engineering manager or anything like that. In 80s, we were considered okay researchers, and maybe some of the people got jobs, but there were no entrepreneurs or CEOs or anything like that. In 90s, slowly they started accepting Indians as managers. So you could be a manager in an engineering company or maybe a professor and so on. But now it's amazing, Indians, if you're an Indian, you get a preference in some ways because they think every Indian is a genius, right? And so you see these CEOs of all the major corporations, a lot of startup entrepreneurs who are doing amazingly well. You're beginning to see presidents of universities, a lot of leadership in the academia, of course, doctors, almost 10-15% of the doctors in India, in US, are of Indian origin. So a lot of the people, when they see you, they say, "Hey, are you a doctor?" Because they love their Indian doctors because they're very caring and very connecting and so on. Yeah. And of course, investment world. I mean, you're in it, so you're an Indian, so you see a lot of your colleagues. So I think, and then the journalists, and so Indians are making a mark in pretty much everything. But also, I think early 70s and 80s, when we came here, there wasn't much going on in India. So every time we went back to India, people would be very upset with you. They would say, "Hey, you're a Deshdrohi. You went to IIT, we spent a lot of time training you, and you just defected, right?" The brain drain. But I think the Indians coming to US and doing well has had a huge impact on India. Number one, it gave Indians the confidence in India that if he can do it, I can do it too. And then the markets opened up because when Indians develop products and bring it here, people don't doubt that Indians are capable of developing products. And of course, by the time 90s, 2000 came along, entrepreneurs in India were building bigger things and better things than anybody who's built them outside of India. And so it's been a very synergistic approach. So the 20, 30 million people in diaspora, which lives outside of India, has been some of the best ambassadors for the country. Your success, I'm sure, is of course your academic background, your experience, you venturing into startups. I'm sure the backbone has been Mrs. Deshpande, right? She too equally qualified, working very hard to support the family. I'm going to we'll invite Mrs. Deshpande to join you on the podcast. But maybe before she comes, just share what's been your, how has it been living with a family in the United States, coming across some tough challenges, but at the same time overcoming them and looking at it very optimistically and in a very positive way and overcoming them? Yeah, no. Jaishree has been a tremendous partner. As you know, she also went to IIT Madras, so we connected. We connect well on that front, on the academic front. But also, in the journey that we have had, we both have had amazing things to experience and do and see and meet very good people and so on. And it would not have possible if she wasn't there all the way, or sometimes she leads and I help, and also we, even though she's also a technology person, we never did any companies together because the kids were very small and so on. But for the last 20 years or so, we've been working on the foundation together on an equal basis. And so we travel together, we do things together, we make decisions together. And so it's been an amazing experience. Great. So the listeners out there, let's welcome Mrs. Jaishree Deshpande. She'll be joining us on the podcast shortly. And we'll talk about what's been her life for her
working and living with in the United States with Dr. Deshpande and the family in a short while from now. We have Mrs. Jaishree Deshpande joining the Dr. Deshpande in Boston. Welcome, ma'am. My first question, of course, is you have played a very major role, a very strong role, not just supporting Dr. Deshpande, but also the family and working hard. It's not, I'm sure it was not an easy journey way back in the 80s. And the success is something that, is of a different kind. How has it been working? The reason I ask you this, Mrs. Deshpande, is because we have a lot of entrepreneurs here in India who are now, having startups, and I'm sure their spouses are having equally tough time because they have left a cozy job, a consistent salary, and now they are in their startup phase, and their wives, their kids have had tough times probably for the next few years. What were your experiences, and what sharings would you have, Mrs. Deshpande?
About 20, 30 years ago, there was no ecosystem if one wanted to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So the entrepreneur had to make a big commitment. Dash went without a salary for a year, and I was the sole breadwinner. And we had 2 kids.
Wow.
It was a bit hard, but we wanted to live that way. It didn't look like we were sacrificing anything. But now the environment system is very supportive. So both the spouses can have their individual careers as well.
Yeah.
But yet they have to make a big commitment. Otherwise, it's a bit hard.
True. I can completely imagine. You and Dr. Deshpande have been instrumental in setting up the hostel, the in IIT Madras. I'm sure that was a dream come true for you. What were your thoughts behind this hostel for girls, women in Madras?
I joined IIT Madras for my master's in physics in 1973, and there is only one hostel for girls. The hostels in IIT Chennai, Madras have been named after rivers, and this was called Saryu Hostel. And I didn't have a room, so I would study in the common room, library, and I didn't know where I was going to sleep because we were short of rooms. So this is the first term. Then later I got a room. So I always said to myself that if I've ever had more resources, I would build a hostel for ladies. Even when I was working in Bangalore for NAL and ISRO, it was hard to get a spot in the ladies' hostel. And so there are now, I visited IIT Chennai recently. There are 4 hostels exclusively for ladies: Saryu, Sharavati, Sabarmati, and I think Tunga.
Oh, okay.
And we decided to name it Sharavati because Sharavati is a big river in Karnataka.
Yeah, okay. You two have, along with Dr. Deshpande, played a very immense and a very strong role in the social development of India. What from your lens, what has been those challenges on the ground, and where do you see the future for these social development initiatives that both you and Dr. Deshpande have initiated?
Desh and I, like, we didn't start a company together, but we work on the foundation together. We have been equal partners.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like planned. Everything evolved, and I've enjoyed working on many new initiatives in India as well as in US.
Okay.
So whatever we do it together. We make a decision together, we travel together, and I've been enjoying that.
Wonderful. There's a very interesting thing I did see when I was doing the research is you have also managed to climb 3 mountain peaks, right? In spite of busy schedules, in spite of supporting family, you did get, the time to, and it's not an easy thing, right? And 3 big mountain peaks in India. Anything that you recall, and how easy or challenging was that?
Yeah, in when I turned 50, I had an opportunity to go to the to do the Everest base camp. And Desh had a back surgery. He couldn't go, but he encouraged me to go. And I went, and I hadn't done anything like that before. So it opened my eyes. I had done something that I didn't know I could do it. So it really opened up all the possibilities. And I'm not a mountaineer or an athlete, but I felt that I could do anything. And then once a bug bites you, once you're bitten by a bug, you
agree.
Yeah. So in 2006, I did the Mount Kailash and Manasarovar. And then again in 2014, I did the Gosavi Kund trek. So all these three were in Nepal. And I always wanted to trek in India. And just 2 months ago, I did the fourth one.
Oh, that's awesome.
I trekked up to Tapovan and Gomukh. And I love going on these treks because it gives me, I feel it's like a meditation. When you're at a high altitude, you can't talk to others continuously.
Peace of mind.
So you have time to reflect and become a newer version after the trek is over. And also it gives an opportunity it gave me a new level of confidence. And also it broadened my comfort zone. Being with someone in a tent for many days, you learn to adjust and adapt. And then more than anything else, I learned to be grateful for everything that comes my way. Seeing people there living in a hostile environment, I feel I'm truly blessed.
Amazing. Very, very, very inspiring, ma'am, to hear this. And I'm sure there are a couple of more treks coming your way. And I'm on that very, very positive and a very high note. Mrs. Deshpande and Dr. Deshpande, thank you so much for being on my podcast and sharing such amazing experiences. You both have been in the United States in the 80s, and a little while earlier when Dr. Deshpande was telling me about how the perception of India and Indians has changed. It is thanks to you guys, who have been in the US since 70s, 80s, have done that hard work and have a name for oneself that led to the generation now getting that recognition much easier, right? So thank you so much for this, for this amazing podcast interview, and best wishes for all your, your endeavors, and of course the Deshpande Foundation, which in a way for India, right, as Indians, which has been an amazing contribution. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, sir.
So Santosh, we do an annual conference in Hubli every year, first weekend of February. So the upcoming one in 2024 is on February 2nd and 3rd. So if anybody wants to come, they're more than welcome to.
Oh yeah, that's thanks for this information, sir. And I'm sure and Hubli is something which my cousins have been, so I've been there quite often, so I kind of connect. So yeah, thank you so much, and all the very, very best, sir. And take care.
Thank you, Santosh.
Thank you.
The Sound of Money with Santosh Sirur.